Hi guys, it's Seng here from Venture Photography Workshops. Today I thought I'd just show you how you can do a very simple exposure blend of two images using the layer blend mode in Photoshop coupled with Lightroom. So we're starting off with two images here. They're both taken at night at the same place. The camera's on a tripod, nothing's moved. The first exposure, which is this light painting event featuring a bit of steel wool spin by my good friend Shane Taylor. Basically has the exposure set for the actual steel wool spin itself. So when you look at the picture, it's predominantly dark, but the actual spin of the wool itself, the fireworks effect that we get from the wool spin, isn't overexposed. The second exposure, as you can see, is a lot brighter in terms of what we can see in the background and the surroundings. So it's actually been set for ambient light. So if you look at the values for the actual steel wool spin image, you'll see that it says ISO 100, f7.1 and 20 seconds of an exposure there. Whereas if you were to look at the exposure values for the ambient frame, you'll see that it's ISO 800, f5.6, 20-second exposure there as well. Really the 5.6 aperture and ISO 800 is there to make sure that the camera is capturing more light. So we've got both exposures. I've actually done a bit of tweaking for both images in Lightroom. So if I went into Develop module, you'll see that what I've done is actually played around with some of the actual exposure, contrast, highlight values available here. Similarly, for the ambient exposure, you'll see that I've actually played around with a number of those values, as well as added a bit more of a bluish, purplish color cast because I wanted to have that kind of nice look to the actual image. Now that we've actually made those changes to both images in Lightroom, we can basically open them up in Photoshop, but to open them up as two layers in a single window. So here we go. Right click, edit in, and open as layers in Photoshop will open both those images in the same window as two separate layers. Here we go. Okay, we are now in Photoshop and you can see here that both images have now opened in the same window but as two separate layers. The top layer features the steel wool spin image and the bottom layer features the ambient image. What we are going to do is to blend both exposures together. So we want to retain the ambient exposure from the bottom layer but actually hold on to the steel wool spin exposure from the top layer. Because the steel wool spin is a lot brighter in the top layer, what we're going to do is set the top layer's exposure or layer blend mode to screen. This will make sure that anything that's bright remains in the top layer, but it will show through anything in the bottom layer that's actually dark. And here we go. Now, this is obviously just a one-click button exposure blend using the layers blend method. You'll notice straight away that it looks a bit hazy. So what we'll need to do is actually tweak both layers slightly just to make sure that we're able to bring some pop into the steel wool spin, as well as perhaps dramatize the ambient exposure a little bit more. So the first thing I'll do basically is I'll create what we call a curves adjustment layer above the bottom layer. So it will only affect the bottom layer. And the way I do that is click on the bottom layer, go up to my panel, adjustments panel, and select the curves adjustment option. So what this does now is it pops up a curves adjustment layer just above the bottom ambient layer, and I can now adjust the appearance of that bottom layer just to make sure that anything that's bright, i.e. the information in the top layer, shows through. All right, that looks good. Now what I want to do with the top layer is I want to actually kind of play around with the contrast of the actual steel wool spin effect itself. So I'll click on the top layer and I'll do a curves adjustment layer on top of that. Now what I need to do here is I only want what I do in this curves adjustment to affect the steel wool layer and not the other two layers below the steel wool layer. So I need to clip this curves adjustment layer to the steel wool layer so that it only affects that particular layer and not the ones below it. And the easiest way to do that is select the curves adjustment, and then in the properties tab just click on your clip button right down here. Now what I'll then do is using the curves adjustment, I might just help make that steel wool a little bit stronger and a little bit brighter in appearance. Okay, so you can see what we've got here is a really nice steel wool exposure, but we can see more of the ambient. So it's merged both exposures together. This looks pretty good. Let's bring this back into Lightroom so that we can tweak it up a little bit more. Okay, and we are back in Lightroom, and you'll see that what Photoshop has done is it's actually saved this file, which is basically the blended two layers in the one file, as a 16-bit TIFF file. So we can play with this a little bit more in Lightroom. The first thing I like to do is make sure that the horizon's pretty straight. Yep, that looks good to me. So I'll just use the crop tool there. And then what I'll do normally here is just tweak around with some of the actual treatment values, exposure treatment values. So I might just up the contrast a little bit, bring in a little bit more shadow, add a little of clarity, small little tweaks like that, just to, and maybe just drop the highlights a little bit more just so that I can see a bit more detail and color in the actual wool spin and up the vibrance a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. I don't like this bit of sandbar that's sticking at the bottom. It's got a bit of weeds on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop it out. And I'm going to do this by cropping on a 16:9 crop just to give this image a bit more length as opposed to height. And I'm going to position the horizon just slightly above that bottom horizontal line, the grid. And I'm going to basically pull back on the side to get rid of this little green light here, simply because it has the potential to draw the attention right to the edge of that screen and take us away from the actual steel wool spin there. That's it. Too easy. And here's the finished product. Looks pretty good, hey? That's it, as simple as that. So it's just a 5-minute tweak on your part, and you basically managed to get a brilliant light painting event, steel wool spin, and merged it with an ambient exposure of the actual scene where it happened. Thanks for listening, guys, and if you'd like to find out more about our workshops and what we can do for your photography, just check out our website, www.venturephotography.com.au.